This is Land of Havilah, 2 Chronicles 35. Josiah took the throne at age 8. At 16, he began to seek Yahweh. At 20, he began to purge paganism. At 26, he repaired the temple, discovered the law of Moses, and made a covenant to follow it. Of course, when he learned about the law, he learned about Passover. In the same year he learned about it, which was age 26, verse 1. Josiah kept a Passover to Yahweh in Jerusalem. They killed the Passover on the 14th day of the first month. He set the priests in their offices and encouraged them in the service of Yahweh's house. He said to the Levites who taught all Israel, who were holy to Yahweh, "Put the holy ark in the house which Solomon the son of David, king of Israel, built. It will no longer be a burden on your shoulders. Now serve Yahweh your God and his people Israel. Prepare yourselves after your fathers' houses by your divisions, according to the writing of David, king of Israel, and according to the writing of Solomon his son. Stand in the holy place according to the divisions of the fathers' houses of your brothers, the children of the people, and let there be for each a portion of a father's house of the Levites. Kill the Passover, sanctify yourselves, and prepare for your brothers to do according to Yahweh's word by Moses." Comment in verse 1, they killed the Passover, meaning they killed thousands of Passover lambs, approximately one lamb for every household in attendance. They did this on the day Yahweh specified in the law, the day they should have been doing it every year, which was in the first calendar month of the year, on the 14th day of that month, Exodus 12:6, which is March or April for us. In verse 2, Josiah encouraged the priests in the service of Yahweh's house, meaning in the performance of the Passover sacrifices, because none of them had any experience with Passover. They missed it the last 75 Passovers, assuming King Manasseh stopped it in his first year. In verse 3, even as they're preparing for the Passover, they're still getting the temple in operating order. Apparently they removed the ark from the temple during repairs, or the previous kings removed it, and in verse 3, Josiah ordered the Levites to put it back into the temple for the Passover. So in verses 2 to 6, the priests and Levites had to figure out how to organize the Passover because they hadn't ever done it. They divided up the duties. In the original Passover in Egypt, each family killed a lamb at home, which was according to Yahweh's instructions in Exodus 12. But 40 years afterward, when they were about to enter the Promised Land, Yahweh updated the law in the book of Deuteronomy so that all the sacrifices of Israel should be performed in one location, quote, "the place which Yahweh your God shall choose out of all your tribes to put his name there. You shall seek his habitation, and there you shall come," chapter 12, verse 5. Therefore, from the time the Israelites entered the land, Passover was a pilgrimage event. The faithful gathered at the tabernacle or temple, which was Yahweh's habitation, and the place he chose to put his name. So the temple was the place that the priests sacrificed the lambs, skinned them, sprinkled the blood, and gave the lambs to the families. The families took the lambs to their lodgings for the Passover meal. Therefore, on Passover, it was a big job to sacrifice all those lambs and service the thousands of people that were coming in and out of the courtyards. And this year, where did they get the lambs? Verse 7. Josiah gave to the children of the people of the flock lambs and young goats, all of them for the Passover offerings, to all who were present, to the number of 30,000 and 3,000 bulls. These were of the king's substance. Comment in verse 7, what would goats and bulls have to do with Passover? This comes from the Passover law of Numbers 28, which involves bulls, rams, and goats in addition to lambs, but these animals were for whole burnt offering. In other words, they were for complete consumption by fire on the altar. The burnt offerings had to be sacrificed in addition to the thousands of lambs for the meal, so it was a big workload for the priests and Levites. In addition to the animals the king supplied, verse 8, his princes gave for a freewill offering to the people, to the priests, and to the Levites. Hilkiah, Zechariah, and Jehiel, the rulers of God's house, gave to the priest for the Passover offerings 2,600 small livestock and 300 head of cattle. Conaniah also, and Shemaiah and Nethanel his brothers, and Hashabiah, Jael, and Jozabad, the chiefs of the Levites, gave to the Levites for the Passover offerings 5,000 small livestock and 500 head of cattle. Comment in verse 8, we see the same Hilkiah of the last chapter who was high priest at this time. He was father of the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah was already active starting 5 years before this Passover, Jeremiah 1:2. He was Jeremiah son of Hilkiah, Jeremiah 1:1. Jeremiah will prophesy about Judah's waywardness, the upcoming Babylonian captivity, and that they'll eventually be released from captivity. The kings following Josiah won't listen to Jeremiah, but if they had, Jeremiah could have relieved them of most of their suffering. But back to Josiah's first Passover, verse 10. So the service was prepared, and the priests stood in their place, and the Levites by their divisions, according to the king's commandment. They killed the Passover, and the priests sprinkled the blood which they received of their hand, and the Levites flayed them. Comment, in explanation of that, the sacrifices had to be drained of the blood, Leviticus 17:12, and flayed, as verse 11 and Leviticus 1:6 say, which means skinned. So skinning was a big part of the workload. And as to sprinkling, in verse 11, the priest always sprinkled a small amount of the blood of any sacrifice, either before the veil of the temple or around on the bronze altar. Regarding the burnt offerings Yahweh commanded for Passover, which are the animals that will be completely consumed by fire on the bronze altar, verse 12, they removed the burnt offerings that they might give them according to the divisions of the fathers' houses of the children of the people, to offer to Yahweh as it's written in the book of Moses. They did the same with the cattle. Comment, they removed the burnt offerings, meaning they set aside the animals for burnt offering, making a separation between them and the lambs for the meal. Regarding the lambs for the meal, verse 13, they roasted the Passover with fire according to the ordinance. They boiled the holy offerings in pots, in cauldrons, and in pans, and carried them quickly to all the children of the people. Afterward they prepared for themselves and for the priests, because the priests, the sons of Aaron, were busy with offering the burnt offerings and the fat until night. Therefore the Levites prepared for themselves and for the priests, the sons of Aaron. The singers, the sons of Asaph, were in their place according to the commandment of David, Asaph, Heman, and Jeduthun, the king's seer, and the gatekeepers were at every gate. They didn't need to depart from their service because their brothers, the Levites, prepared for them. Comment, in verse 15, the musical divisions of the Levites sang and played and didn't participate in the sacrifices. This was according to the division of labor David set up by his orders to Asaph, Heman, and Jeduthun, 1 Chronicles 25:1. In verse 15, either the musical divisions have kept themselves organized all these years, or they resurrected the divisions at this time. The musicians kept to their music, and the gatekeepers kept to the gates. The priests kept to the burnt offerings because that kept them busy until night, and the other Levites prepared the Passover lambs for them and for all the people. Verse 16. So all the service of Yahweh was prepared the same day to keep the Passover and to offer burnt offerings on Yahweh's altar according to the commandment of King Josiah. The children of Israel who were present kept the Passover at that time and the Feast of Unleavened Bread 7 days. Comment, in verse 17, the Feast of Unleavened Bread immediately followed the Passover, which was the way it should be, Exodus 12:15. Verse 18, there was no Passover like that kept in Israel from the days of Samuel the prophet, nor did any of the kings of Israel keep such a Passover as Josiah kept, with the priests, the Levites, and all Judah and Israel who were present, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. This Passover was kept in the 18th year of the reign of Josiah. Comment, 3 generations before this, Hezekiah's Passover was said to be unlike anything since Solomon, 2 Chronicles 30:26. In verse 18, this Passover by Josiah seems to have been even better, nothing being like it since the time of the judges, since Samuel. None of the kings kept a Passover like this one by Josiah. Coming up, the Egyptian armies passing by Judah headed to Carchemish on the Euphrates River. Pharaoh Necho doesn't intend to stop and fight Judah along the way. This is now Josiah's 31st and last year on the throne, which would make him 39 years old. How will he respond to the Egyptian army marching through? Verse 19. After all this, when Josiah had prepared the temple, Necho, king of Egypt, went up to fight against Carchemish by the Euphrates, and Josiah went out against him. Comment, Josiah went out to fight the Egyptians that were trespassing on what he considered to be his land. Speaking of Pharaoh Necho and Josiah, verse 21, but he sent ambassadors to him, saying, What have I to do with you, you king of Judah? I come not against you today, but against the house with which I have war. God has commanded me to make haste. Beware that it is God who is with me, that he not destroy you. Nevertheless, Josiah would not turn his face from him, but disguised himself that he might fight with him, and didn't listen to the words of Necho from the mouth of God, and came to fight in the valley of Megiddo. Comment in verses 21 and 22, Necho says, I'm only passing through. Leave me alone if you know what's good for you. Necho was speaking from God, but Josiah didn't listen. Josiah plans to attack him in the valley of Megiddo, also known as the Jezreel Valley, which separates Samaria from Galilee. It's the middle of the old northern kingdom. Josiah feels like it's his own territory, but only if he can defend it during the battle, verse 23. The archers shot at King Josiah, and the king said to his servants, Take me away, because I'm seriously wounded. So his servants took him out of the chariot and put him in the second chariot that he had, and brought him to Jerusalem, and he died, and was buried in the tombs of his fathers. Comment 2 Kings 23:30 is clearer that Josiah died somewhere between Megiddo and Jerusalem. Quote, His servants carried him in a chariot dead from Megiddo. Still in verse 24. All Judah and Jerusalem mourned for Josiah. Jeremiah lamented for Josiah, and all the singing men and singing women spoke of Josiah in their lamentations to this day, and they made them an ordinance in Israel. Behold, they are written in the Lamentations. Comment, there's no mention of Josiah's name in our book of Lamentations, so maybe verse 25 refers to a lost work. However, Jeremiah did say, quote, Don't weep for the dead, don't bemoan him, but weep bitterly for him who goes away, for he will return no more and not see his native country, Jeremiah 22:10. In other words, the ones who died before the Babylonian invasion were better off. They didn't get taken into captivity and spend the rest of their lives bemoaning their lost land. After Pharaoh killed Josiah in battle, it was Pharaoh who called the shots in Judah, but not for long. Soon the Babylonians crushed Pharaoh at Carchemish, and Babylonia called the shots in Judah. So after Josiah died, it was immediate humbling for Judah, followed soon by horrors, and by God's grace, Josiah didn't live to suffer any of that. This fulfilled the word of Huldah the prophet to Josiah in the last chapter, quote, Your eyes won't see all the evil that I will bring on this place and on its inhabitants, verse 26. Now the rest of the acts of Josiah and his good deeds, according to that which is written in Yahweh's law, and his acts first and last, behold, they're written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. Comment from 2 Kings 23:25, speaking of Josiah, quote, There was no king like him before him, who turned to Yahweh with all his heart and with all his soul and with all his might, according to all the law of Moses, and there was none like him who arose after him. End quote. 2 Chronicles 36 is next, the last chapter of the book.